Welcome to episode 60 of Broad Street Hustle. I am your host, Tommy Nanny. We are talking the misery of Philadelphia sports. We said we're going to do it for a little bit now. We're finally squeezing it in. It's a little housekeeping. We're doing Flyers and Sixers tonight. The misery of the Flyers and Sixers over the last 40 years or so. Then we'll take a brief hiatus next week. So the 10 of you out there, unfortunately, you'll have to listen to the best of. And then we will pick back up with the Phillies and Eagles, which is going to be a great show. But let's jump into it. I got Jason Sayada with me.
Hey, Tom.
Jason, how are you? Jimmy the Chalk.
Good evening.
Chalky. And returning to your airwaves and video, Christopher Michael Maker.
What's up, guys? How are you tonight?
What is up? All right, let's jump right into it. We got the Flyers first. So I know I said the last 40 years, but for whatever reason, I only put since 1986. I guess that's that St. John Newman math. Didn't really get it done. But I got since 1986, the Flyers have had 18 coaches. There was a run from 89 to 93, right? 5 years with missing the playoffs, and then something magical happened in 92, and I'm sure we'll get into that. That kind of brought the Flyers back to life. 2016, another big year. That's when Comcast bought out the minority of Ed Snyder and kind of changed the franchise. The last 3 seasons, which we haven't had a winning season or more than 31 wins in the last 3 seasons, and have missed the playoffs. The last 2 seasons, missed 5 playoffs. So since Comcast bought them, they missed 5 out of the last 7 years. So, that could lead into what we're going to talk about a little bit. But I know Jason has a bunch of stats with us. Oh, the Flyers did have 24 winning seasons over that span. So as we get into some of the other sports, that's probably more than a lot of the other Philadelphia teams. But we'll get into that. So, Jason, I know you had some stuff you wanted to cover. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, before we even get into the Flyers, I'll just take a step back. So in the last 40 years, I guess we started after the Sixers won their championship in '83. And just to show how pathetic Philadelphia sports has been in the last 40 years, that would be approximately 160 seasons in total, right? Philadelphia sports has gotten to the Final Four in their league 22 times out of 160, which not too bad. It's 14% or so 1 out of every 7 seasons. But I think a lot of that skewed because a lot of that came in the early 80s or the mid 80s and late 80s with the Flyers. Only 12 out of 160 seasons has a Philadelphia team gone to the finals, and that's 7.5%. And then, of course, the most pathetic stat is out of 160 seasons, Philadelphia teams have won 2 championships, which is 1.25%, which is absolutely pathetic.
And nothing more telling than last year when 2 of them made it to the finals, both losing at points where it looked like they may have won we're going to win it all.
Yeah, I mean, last year of all seasons was probably one of the most successful, but yeah, I mean, 2 out of 160 is just not acceptable, obviously. But just all right. So we're going to start with the Flyers. So just some brief notes that I wrote down. So in the early 80s, the Flyers got old, right? The Flyers of the 70s, which obviously were one of the great franchises in Philadelphia sports history. Guys started getting old. So what was happening was in the early 80s, and Meeker will remember this, like they were good during the regular season. And then they get to the playoffs, and then they play the Rangers, who were not good, and the Rangers would beat them. Like, it happened a couple of times. Even the Capitals did the same thing to them. So at some point, the Flyers were like, okay, we're getting old. We need to push Bobby Clark to management. So they forced him to retire in '84. And they traded all their old players, and they went with like a kiddie core in '84. And that team was surprisingly very good. It was coached by Mike Keenan. They went to the finals in '85, but unfortunately they ran into the Edmonton Oilers, right? A dynasty. So they got beat, and then Pelle Lindbergh died. which was, a real shot to the franchise. But a year later, they got Ron Hextall, and then they went back to the Cup in '87 against the Oilers again. So the late '80s Flyers teams were pretty good. What happened after that? And not just to get back to '87, they probably could have won that Cup if Tim Kerr was healthy. He did not play in those finals.
That was the All-Sides Cup as well, right?
'87? No.
Oh, which year?
80 was offsides. Yeah.
Which year was that?
1980.
Oh, 80. Wasn't that against Edmonton as well?
No, Islanders.
Islanders. Yeah.
Oh, I.
Me and Meeker were watching that in my living room. But anyway, so Tim Kerr got hurt, and they really had no chance, and they went to Game 7. I mean, Ron Hextall stood on his head, and they would have probably put his picture on the cup if they won that cup. But so anyway, so that team also started getting old in the late '80s, and they kind of had like a couple of down years, and then they decided to go for it. They decided to trade for Eric Lindros. You can't really fault them there. I mean, that was the right move. They never had a goalie, though, for those teams. And, you guys are probably too young to remember the true Ron Hextall, right? When they got Ron Hextall back for those teams, that wasn't really Ron Hextall, right? He had gotten hurt in the late 80s, and he just never was never the same again. So the Hextall you saw was, like, not Ron Hextall. They did not have a goalie. They were not successful. Lindros started getting hurt, and basically that was it. So what happened was they made a few runs in the early 2000s. Then the salary cap was introduced in 2005, 2006, and that was pretty much the end for the Flyers. They did catch lightning in a bottle in 2010 by going to the finals, but that was, again, lightning in the bottle. I think Ed Snyder was a fantastic owner. He did whatever it took to win. He didn't care about money. He spent money to win. But they never knew how to manage the cap. And, Tommy mentioned that Ed Snyder passed away and Comcast took over. It's been a disaster ever since. They've gone from pretty much the best organization in the city to the worst. But it seems like Keith Jones and Daniel Briere are trying to do things to get them back to where they should be. In closing, I'll just say I think there's two main reasons that they got to where they were. They were so good every year that they would draft late in the draft, and they actually were okay at doing it. Like I have written down they drafted Gagne in '98. They drafted him late. 2000, they drafted Justin Williams late. 2006, they drafted Giroux late in the draft, right, in the first round, and they were doing well. And then the Patrick Kane thing, they had the best odds to get the top pick that year, and of course they lost out to the Blackhawks. They didn't get Patrick Kane. That was a major blow to them because the gap between JVR and Patrick Kane was outrageous, as you guys know. And they just never recovered from that. So I think, the 05-06 cap, when the NHL introduced that, I think that was probably the main reason they've gotten to where they were. But then the Patrick Kane thing also, again, they just never recovered from that.
Yeah, I mean, and that happened again with you can argue with like Nolan Patrick, right, in that draft as well, where they
actually got lucky in that draft to get that high,
right, and then
they shouldn't have been that high, but then they drafted a guy who had injury issues, so a roundabout way they got unlucky there too. Yep.
So Jason is the biggest. I don't know about you guys, but I consider Jason probably the biggest hockey or Flyer fan that I know, so I defer to him with a lot of these questions. But do you think that the problem with the Flyers is or still is that the game of hockey kind of passed by their style of play because of what they were so successful with in the 70s doing and leading into the 80s, and still having the old guard there, that same old guard was now managing the team? So they still wanted to play the same kind of style.
I don't know if it's that. I think it's more of because Ed Snyder would just go out and get guys who were good playing whatever style, right? He would just go out and get them. But once the salary cap started happening, you couldn't do that anymore, right? Once 05, 06 came along, now you got to manage. Now you can't just go out and sign a Vinny LeCavalier who can't play anymore and then just decide a year later, all right, we're going to get rid of you and we're going to go sign somebody else and maybe he could play. You know what I mean? Once you go out and make that Vinny LeCavalier signing, now you're done, right? So, I think a part of it is, their whole philosophy is never to go out and get like the skilled player who,
Right.
Doesn't get dirty in the corners, doesn't hit, doesn't fight and stuff. But, they had those players like Tockett and all who could do everything. Like he could go hit and he could still score and, your Tim Kerrs and your Lindrosses and your Tocketts, like those guys could do everything, right? So, I think
I think I'm more talking about the leadership though, right? Because of you look at all the who was the most successful coach since that era? Would Hitchcock be the most successful coach since that era?
Well, they keep changing coaches.
Yeah, they don't.
That's
they
the
never
that's the
won.
problem.
Years.
The lack of continuity.
But that's the NHL in general. I mean, NHL coaches.
It
don't
is though,
have a
yeah.
long shelf life. No, but I mean, you could argue like in the last, 10 years, and I don't think it was that the old guard was drafting muckers and grinders and Broad Street bullies. They were drafting either the wrong guys or guys that looked correct and they never developed. I mean, you look at the Hextall years, and they had a defensive core that they drafted that you were like, the Flyers, the blue line for the next 10 years, 15 years is with Sam Moran, Provorov, there was a Sanheim, and then they just turned into nothing. They drafted Konechny thinking that we got our skilled guy, and he's a middle of the road guy. Like all these guys that they thought were going to turn into something, they either didn't develop them or they misdrafted what they thought they were going to be. It's not like they were getting these, Kevin Dineen's and guys that are going to do like that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like they fell into that pattern of like they were just good every year and were drafting late, and they were doing a good job of it. Like you get Gagne late in the draft, you get Giroux late in the draft.
They were better at getting guys later in the draft than they were at getting guys earlier in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. You could definitely say that.
When I think of the Flyers too, there's like names that just come that they would always get that guy that was just past his like not even prime, like past like the Adam Oates. They got
Chris
Adam
Pronger.
Oates a little too long. Well, Pronger had good years.
Great.
For them.
He got hurt.
He just got hurt.
But he got hurt. Yeah.
Adam Oates was one of them that came to mind. Keith Kachuk. Didn't they get Kachuk like real in his like
Howard
Nah.
Chuck back in the day.
No.
Ronick.
Ronick was good.
They got basically
I thought
they
they
were
got
trying to
Kachuk.
win though. They're
Amani.
Oh yeah,
Tony
Tony
Amonte.
Amonte. Maybe that's.
But those are guys that you're getting like at the trade deadline to try to put you over the
Right,
hump.
but
that's my point. Like they always tried to win. Like Ed Snyder was like, do it. Like I'm spending. I'm trying to win. Like they always tried to win. And then once, those things happened before the salary cap, like your Montes and your Ronicks and all that stuff. So the game just changed, and they just never knew how to manage the cap, and hopefully like Jones and Briere is going to start a new era with them in managing the cap.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. Now it's been bad for the last, and it's not just bad. It's just like irrelevant hockey.
They're irrelevant.
You
Like
you don't watch it. It's hard to
Meeker
watch.
said I'm one of the biggest fans. I couldn't care less when they're on. I don't care what they're doing. I don't even want to watch them. They're boring. They're not doing the right thing. Like I'm actually like this year. I see with Jones and Briere. I mean, they haven't done it yet, but there's a lot of talk of like guys are going to be going right. They're going to clean house here. And that's what I like to see, and we'll get into that with the Sixers. Like, I like
they
to
just
see
waited,
a
and it's
plan.
not their fault, but they waited too long.
Well, they waited a year too long.
Yeah, at least a year too long.
I like to see a plan. Like, guess what? If they sell everybody this year and they're horrible, I'll be interested in them because I know they have a plan. They're going to get a top 3 pick or whatever they're going to get, and that's how you win, right? That's how you win now.
I think they were so afraid of doing that, under the older guard because.
Well, like I said, Ed Snyder. So I said Ed Snyder was a great owner, and he was. But couple things happened with him. He got sick, right? And he knew he didn't have many years left. And they didn't want to – they wanted to try to go for it. And I understand that. It probably wasn't the right thing to do, but the guy was on his last legs, and they wanted to try to do something before he died. But after that, and Comcast took over, that's where they really effed up. Like, that's when you got it. Once Ed Snyder passes away, and, you know, now you start rebuilding, right? They never did that. They started to patch bubble gum into the Hoover Dam holes, you know what I mean? And it just didn't work. And you know, now, like I said, hopefully it seems like Keith Jones and Briere are going to try and tear it down and build it back up.
By adding ex-Flyers to their whole organization again.
I mean they are, but you know, if they're selling and rebuilding.
Well, I mean,
know,
they had
let's see
Fletcher.
what
They
can
had
do.
an outsider, and you saw that he didn't do anything. So.
Well, I think, you know, I don't blame Fletcher as much as a lot of people. I think he was a puppet for Dave Scott.
Yeah. Oh, Comcast was
And Comcast.
turning over a profit. Right. That's all they care about.
Exactly. You know, Comcast wanted to sell tickets. That's why they got people banging drums and gritty, and they don't care. As long as people are in the stands, they don't give a shit. But now, you know, maybe these guys are going to try to win, hopefully. So, and listen, I mean, they're going to take a hit. Like, people aren't going to go. You know, you're not going to sell tickets.
Oh, it's
been.
I mean, that's probably part of the reason why they're making these changes, because people are slowly backing off of the game, right? And they could see the trends.
It's going to get worse.
They could see the
trend. If you
trend.
win 25 games next year, I mean, it's.
I mean, and let's be honest. Hockey is the fourth sport in every city, you know, for the most part.
Wasn't in Philadelphia.
No,
but it is. Yeah,
it is now.
It wasn't
by far.
Now.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Chalky, you're talking too much. Calm down.
Yeah, what's up?
Well, I was saving the best for last because I'll tell you.
You're wearing a Flyers T-shirt, aren't you?
I haven't had a chance.
Bobby Clark. I see.
Lindros.
Are you the captain?
Lindros.
Are you the?
All right. Okay.
Are you the new draft?
I'm the captain now. So, but I'll say this: if all four sports teams were good, the Flyers would be a distant fourth in the minds of the fans, because baseball, football, basketball would all be above that. But they, you know, those late '90s years were pretty lean for Philadelphia sports, and the Flyers were only the championship contenders.
I'm going to disagree with you. Back in the '80s, when all the teams were good, the Sixers didn't sell. The Sixers did not sell tickets.
The
NBA was a completely different league back then. Like I looked up some of the old box scores. Like look, and it's like amazing. You know, they're in. Dr. J is playing, and they're in like the conference championships, and there's like 12,000 people there.
Yeah.
But and the vet for the Phillies,
but
they didn't sell.
There's a lot that goes. There's a lot goes into that. Let's be honest.
A lot goes into it. And I think one of the things that does go into it is, like, I don't know how you guys feel, but like when we were kids, there were more kids playing hockey than, you know, because they just go out in the street and play it, which they don't really do these days, and, you know, would get into the sport because they would be playing the sport.
Yeah, but
there's
I think
less
that was
kids
because of the Broad Street Bullies. Like when we were young, we were just coming out of that Broad Street Bullies era, and the Flyers were still very hot.
Right.
Like, you know, when we were doing that stuff.
Yeah, you know, where do you see that now? I mean, the sport itself is an extremely expensive sport to play. You know, so like if you're a normal Philadelphia kid, I mean, you're not. Well, that's not the sport that you're deciding to play.
What I'm going to say is the city of Philadelphia has changed. If you go to the suburbs of Delco, they're black and orange out there. If you go to South Jersey, they're black and orange out there. The city of Philly, the makeup of the city, is not going to support a hockey team. I
disagree with that. There's plenty of hipsters that like the Flyers. I see them walking around all the time, even on the worst days. But no, I honestly, like, first of all, as the only Philadelphia resident here, I don't see any kids playing any sports in the street nowadays like we did as kids, whatever. But I'll say the Flyers youth programs, the Ed Snyder League, or whatever they've done, like they've got a lot of kids. They've put some rinks up. There's more. There's probably more kids playing hockey at a somewhat competitive level in like an organized groups than when you guys were kids. Like I'm talking about like leagues, like actual skating, because the Ed Snyder what the youth foundation, I think it is, right? They put a lot of money into it, renovated a lot of the rinks or built rinks around the city, and they got kids. They got kids playing.
Kids
No,
playing
it's
hockey
not street hockey like it
and
was.
kids playing hockey
but-
right now doesn't equate to fans going to the game or being interested in the Flyers.
No, not necessarily. I mean, the tickets are still ridiculously expensive. I'm sure who's going to pay $100 to go see a team lose? Like I mean, that's a hard sell. Like on a 20-degree night, are you going to go down to watch a team get their ass kicked and freeze? Like at least the Phillies, if they're bad, you get a nice summer night. You can sit outside or whatever. Football's an event once a week or once every 2 weeks. Basketball and hockey, if the team stinks, you're not going to go. But anyway, just some quick thoughts on the Flyers. I do kind of agree with Meeker, maybe not in the same way, that I think part of their the downturn in the franchise in the late 80s or late 90s was based on philosophy. They were one of the last teams to really start drafting and bringing in the Eastern European players once they started coming into the league. So that put them behind the 8 ball a little bit. If you look at that 97 Cup final, I mean, how many Russians were on that Detroit team? Like, it felt like half the team was Russian,
They had
it
a
felt
Russian
like
5. They had a
at
Russian
times.
5
Yeah,
on it.
so, I mean, it's, and we had maybe 2, I think. We had started incorporating them, but there wasn't a ton of Russian guys.
That
or
was
even-
Ed Snyder, by the way.
Yeah, that was a Snyder philosophy. So the Flyers would not have been successful at Snyder, but that was one of his knocks. And then the early 90s downturn coincided with him really taking a step back from the franchise. His kid ran it, and Russ Farwell came in as GM. Bobby Clark got fired, and the team just wasn't that good. Then they made the Lindros trade, which people say, it's one of the most lopsided trades in history, and but it was what the franchise needed. Like
It was the right move.
They were trying to build an arena. They needed a marquee player to kind of get the city energized again. And, eventually it worked. And they built that that new arena was built partially on the back of Eric Lindros as the next.
They didn't know that they
thing.
traded a marquee player, though, in that deal.
Or they didn't, but...
No, they didn't. But
Forsberg wasn't a marquee player.
I mean, he wasn't at the time. Forsberg didn't come over to the NHL until 95. So he wasn't even in the league.
But it was like they traded a whole bunch of people too, wasn't it? A bunch.
Look,
guys or something like that.
That trade between the
really
players that were
Forsberg.
sent and the picks and
Hextall
money
and
that
Gretzky.
they made other moves. It gave Colorado two cups because they were able to get Wah and some of the other guys with the stuff that the Flyers sent them. So obviously they put him in that position. So you can't deny that. But I mean, I think Lindros was the guy you kind of needed to sort of restart that Flyers passion in the city. Because look, as great as Forsberg was, he was never a team leader. He was never the guy. Joe Sakic was the leader of all those teams. Forsberg was the leading scorer, but he didn't have to lead the team.
It's irrelevant.
So,
you can't say if I had Forsberg, they're going to win the cup or not going to win the cup because Colorado did or something.
Right.
That's irrelevant. I mean, you got Eric.
So
Lindros,
that's a trade. That's a trade I would do again in hindsight. You take your chance or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then those teams were, like Jason said, the goaltending. Hextall came back, and they just never put enough into the goaltending, like on those teams. And really, like overall, I mean, every team deals with injuries, but I feel maybe it's just because I'm a Flyers fan. Like they had more franchise-changing injuries in the last 40 years than maybe any other hockey team. I mean, if you count Pelle Lindbergh's death, right? Lindros's injuries basically flipped. Well, Hextall after him, Jason was talking about his injury problems. Lindros's injuries directly led to the deterioration of his relationship with the team because he started criticizing the training staff. And then when he was arguably the best player in the game, he was missing a lot of games. He missed a couple of playoff runs in a row. So then they put their eggs in the Keith Primo basket. He ends up with repetitive concussions, can't continue. They signed Forsberg. He's banged up. And then a couple years after that, they get rid of Carter and Richards and kind of make Pronger the leader of the team. And then he goes and gets injured and can't play again. So
How'd those guys do after they left?
Richards
Carter
got
won
locked
cups.
up, but Carter did well.
Carter.
But-
Carter and Richards both won a cup with the
Yeah.
Kings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're both on that Kings team. Carter was hopped up on opioids, but he won the cup.
Yeah.
Well,
Richards.
Or
Was. I mean,
Richards,
Richards was the fourth line center on that Kings
Yeah.
team. He didn't have to be a leader, so that worked out well for him.
But again, it's irrelevant when a guy has success on another team. It's irrelevant because
Doesn't mean it doesn't mean it would have been the
successful on
Flyers.
the team that he was on, right? I mean,
I know, but it just makes it sad. It just makes it sad because
yeah, but that's
when
because
these guys
hold
go,
on a
follow Philadelphia. If you followed another team, the same thing would happen. There's guys they trade that win a cup. We only know that because that's the team we're following.
I kind of know some inside information.
Well, if you win a cup, then you wouldn't feel as bad.
Wow.
But you don't win any since
Look,
1975.
I'm not trying to get us sued, but there's stories about those guys that I know for a fact to be 100% true.
That's what I'm getting to, Jimmy.
Yes.
Basically, I got information from people that know that said there was a reason that Carter and Richards were both traded on the same day because they were doing stuff that they shouldn't have been doing, and
Look,
that's why.
That's why
there's a bar not from me that is legendary. And the stories are all true.
I was in
all
it.
true.
I was
all
in
true.
the bar many times when they were in there.
That's my favorite Flyer story is when Carter sat with Holmgren and said, "Am I going to get traded?" Holmgren said, "We have no plans to trade you." And 2 hours later, he got traded to the game.
Yeah.
I love it.
But just one other thing I'll just add is I think Jason's point about the salary cap changed everything, and that's definitely true. That remember that the first year once the cap got instituted, they spent money on Forsberg, Hatcher, Rathje, guys that were older and big money, and they weren't the right fits to begin with. But then now you're hamstrung with the cap. But then they had momentary good years, and I think they sort of got hooked into thinking they were better than they were, right? So they make the cup run in 2010. All right, well, now we're going to make some trades. We're going to get Brizgalov. We're going to do this and overhaul. And then that kind of fell apart. And then in the COVID season, they had one of the best records in the East. And it was like you had a mix of veteran guys still like Giroux and Hayes, I think, who would come in. And you had young guys like Hart, all the defensemen, Tommy we're talking about, Konechny. So it was like, okay, this is a team that we're ready to contend again, right? Because we went to 7 games against the Islanders, and they haven't made the playoffs since then, right? So I think momentary success lulled them into thinking that they were closer than maybe they were. And really, in the middle of that was the whole Snyder thing. They really should have blew the team up in 15 or 16 and did what they're doing now. Giroux should have gotten traded. And now you're trading a guy like Konechny, who's a good player on a very affordable contract. He's 26, but they're saying well, we might not be good for 5 years, so we don't want when he's 31, he might not be that good. So you're getting rid of good players now because it's going to take 5 years. And that's going to be frustrating and going to be very hard to bring fans in when the team stinks.
But again, that goes back to in 15-16, they were still selling tickets. People were still watching.
Yeah.
So they weren't.
Giroux. Nobody wanted to trade Giroux.
So nobody, right? And we said it for years, but Comcast they weren't going to do that. And say we're rebuilding because they were going to lose money. They didn't want to.
You could have took the momentary pain then with the hit to rebuild, or you're taking it now where it's like we don't know when we're going to be good again.
Back and look at the Colorado
when they're successful in selling tickets, they're not making that business decision to just tear everything down.
Go back and look at the Colorado Avalanche, and that's around the time that they started to sell, take their hits. They were bad, and now they won a cup, and now they're perennial.
Well,
cup
look at the teams that have been the Tampa Bay's been to 4 cups in the last couple years, 1, 2. They were a bad team for a really long time, and they got a bunch of number 1 picks. So they got Stamkos, they got
Hedman.
They got they had franchise changing players, but you got to be bad for a long time to accumulate those guys. There was never any desire on the Flyers' end to be bad for more than 1 or 2 years tops because we got to sell tickets, we got to get people in the building, and it's not a long-term recipe for championships. It's maybe make more money in the immediate future, but how many years now are you going to have 13,000 people tops going in on most nights?
Right.
I digress. Let's move on to the Sixers. Sixers are a whole different animal. We've talked about them since 1986. They've only made it out of the second round once, which was 2001. They've had only 15 winning seasons since 1986. They had a 10-win season during that period of time. We talked about last week or 2 weeks where they were 1-29 at one point. They've had rules that changes to rules because of their ability to tank, like no other team has tanked in history before. They've had years where their best player was, or arguably their best player was Samuel Dallenberg for years. So I mean, I got so many fun names. They've gone through another 1, 2, 3, 4. I can count it up. Another 20 coaches or so. Guys that when I'm writing their names down, I completely forgot about the. Listen to this run of coaches: Doug Moe, Fred Carter, John Lucas, Johnny Davis. Before they got Larry Brown. I mean, that's,
1 year, Johnny Davis.
yeah, a couple of those guys I think were.
Doug
Although
Moe didn't even last the first
nah,
year.
he didn't even
No.
go through. But at the end of the day, my favorite coach, and I'll turn it over to Jason first if he has some stats, was Eddie Jordan. How can you forget about Eddie Jordan?
I did forget about him until I started doing my research
Wow.
and saw him. Yeah.
That was my favorite.
Completely forgot about that.
Yeah.
So let's and I know we're gonna go probably get into the process pretty heavy on this one, as I think we said it was the 10-year anniversary of the start of the process. So we'll probably get in that heavy. Jason, did you have some stats on the Sixers?
Yeah, and just real quick. So the Flyers, so when I gave those stats of Final Fours, the Flyers actually had 8 Final Fours, but most of them were, in the 80s and the 90s. And they had 4 Stanley Cup Finals. Again, 2 in the 80s, 1 in the 90s, and 2010. Yep. The Sixers, since 1983's championship, have had 2 Final Fours, 1985 and 2001, and 1 final, 2001, and no championships. So they are when we rank these teams at the end, unfortunately, they're going to come out last. But so just real fast, just to get into how the Sixers got to where they went to. Pat Williams giveth, and then Harold Katz and Matty Gukas gave away in the 80s. And the reason I say that was in the early 80s, the Sixers decided they needed to do something. They would get to the finals and lose to the Lakers every year. So the Houston Rockets were selling their team, and they decided they couldn't afford Moses Malone. So the Sixers went for it, right? They traded for Moses Malone, and Moses Malone led them to the promised land in 1983. Well, the year after 1983, they had a disappointing loss to the Nets in the first round. And that was it or Billy Cunningham, I think, came back for one more year in 1985. And they lost to the Celtics there in the
Finals.
In the Eastern Conference Finals. At that point, Billy Cunningham decided to retire. And Matty Gukas, who was his head assistant, took over. And Matty Gukas decided that he didn't want Moses Malone. All right. And then Harold Katz decided that even though they had the first pick in the draft that year, which, Sixers made some great trades in the early 80s. Pat Williams is really, really astute as a general manager. They somehow had the first pick in the 1986 draft. Harold Katz brought Brad Daugherty to his house and worked him out on his own and decided he didn't like Brad Daugherty. So they traded the first pick for Roy Hinson. They traded Moses Malone for Jeff Ruland, who had no knees left, and Cliff Robinson. And that there was the beginning of the downfall of the Sixers. Destroyed them for the rest of the 80s. Wasted Barkley's prime. Now in the early 90s, they wound up making a run, right? They drafted Hersey Hawkins in '88. They traded for They traded an aging Mo Cheeks for Johnny Dawkins, which was a good trade until Dawkins blew his knee out. They had Mike Jaminski, who was a decent center, and they made a couple of runs in the 90s. But just like the Flyers ran into dynasties, the Sixers ran into the Bulls every year, and they weren't beating the Bulls. So then the next abomination of a trade happened when they decided, Barkley wanted out because he knew that the franchise was a mess. So Jimmy Lynam decided to trade Charles Barkley to Phoenix for Jeff Hornacek, Tim Perry, and Andrew Lang. No draft picks, and they didn't even get Phoenix's best player back, which was Kevin Johnson. They got Jeff Hornacek back. So that trade decimated the organization for another 4 or 5 years, and then that led to them drafting Allen Iverson. We kind of know the story with Iverson, kind of like a flawed, great player. He's hard to build around. They wound up building around him in 1 year, went to the finals, ran into another dynasty, the Lakers. So that didn't work out. But so basically, Iverson, Iverson kind of wore out his welcome. They decided to trade him, and then it was a disaster. Once Iverson was done and they traded him, it was a 10-year disaster, which led to the process, which I believe was 100% the correct move. They netted a Hall of Fame player for it. They kind of, they had draft picks. They had to draft Ben Simmons. I mean, of course, Ben Simmons turned out to be a disaster, but he was number one consensus player. They had to draft him. I'm losing my notes here, but Okafor was another guy that they kind of forced the draft because, the owners were like, all right, we can't do any more projects. We need a player that's going to play now, even though he couldn't play now. Fultz was another guy who kind of was a consensus number one. So, they made those picks after the process. We could get into why I think the process was the right move, but, I'll stop there and let you guys jump in.
Yeah, we'll get into that. So, they had 15 winning seasons since '86. Well, 6 of those were in the last 6 years. Their winning seasons. So you take that out, they're at 9 winning seasons.
Yeah, you had a couple with Barkley, couple with Iverson.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, I didn't realize the year before they went to the finals, they actually had like almost 50 wins that year.
Yeah, they lost to the Pacers.
Yeah,
yep.
And then the next year is when they won.
In Detroit, they lost. The next year was Detroit, right? That they lost.
No, it was not after the Pacers. It was they
lost
went
to the Pacers.
Then they went to the finals, right?
It was
no. After that, they lost to the.
They lost to
Pacers,
Lakers, Boston, Detroit. Yeah. In that run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, like Jason kind of covered. The Sixers were just have been a mess of a franchise, probably, and it's like this. I guess basketball kind of goes to that, but they were just like had years where they were just so bad, and like you go through their rosters. Like I was looking at that 2015 roster. It's like I can't believe that was the team that they put on the court.
Well,
funny though, a guy that played was Ish Smith, who then he just won a title with Denver.
Yeah, that was part of the process, which
that was the
totally
first year,
with.
kind of. That's the year they drafted.
I'm more
Okafor.
concerned with the years before that, like 2000. Let me give you the records from 2008 to 15: 40 and 42, 41 and 41.
Yeah, well, they were there.
27 and 55, 41 and 41, 35 and whatever. I can't read it.
31.
34 and 48.
Yeah, they were
Caught in the middle.
They were the Dolan Bears, the Thad Youngs,
caught in the middle.
Iguodala
Right
years.
in the middle.
They were the Iguodala era, like when Iguodala is the best player on the team.
Yeah, but
That was the
I'm
era
not
you're
winning you
talking
anything.
about.
No, and that leads into the process. But a lot of teams are like that in the NBA, where every year they just churn, middle of the road. They're the 6th, 7th, 8th seed, and then they get eliminated in the first round. And that's what led to the process. That led to we're not going to win unless, we break it down. We create a culture that free agents may want to sign here. We get number 1 picks in here and win, and that was the process. I don't know if you guys want to bring up anything before we go into kind of the process talk.
I wasn't a process fan. Me and Jason had argument over argument about whether this was the right move for them. But, those years that we're talking about, the beginning of the process through when Embiid kind of surfaced, and like the year before that, they were 109 and 301.
But that's
the
process.
Yeah,
I know, but like, of course, you have to come out of that. You have to come out of that. You have to come out of that with being able to at least get out of the first round or the second round of the playoffs. Give me at least that. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you.
That's wrong.
2013 standing. What's wrong?
That's wrong.
The ends don't necessarily justify the process. The process was about setting yourself up to have
I know
a
what it was
chance
about.
every year to
But-
draft certain players and have it, which they did. They
But,
for
but
the
you,
last
know,
6 years.
you leave too much. You leave too much to chance if you're trying to build a team
What
that
were they
way.
going to do?
because-
What was the other chance?
He wanted to
Well,
finish
let me
41
explain
and
something to
41
you.
every year. Go ahead,
Let me
41,
explain something
41.
to you. The 2013 standings. This is where I'm saying that it didn't work out. The 2013 standings. The Sixers were 34 and 48. Toronto was 34 and 48. Did they win a championship since then? Did
Yeah,
they
but-
tank to win a championship? The
Me-
Bucks were 38
Yeah, but
and
you're
44.
saying
Did
leave
they
it-
win a championship
Yeah, but
since then?
you're-
Why? Because you have to draft the right players,
But that's
number
leaving
one,
more
and you
the
have to
chance-
hit on it.
But that's
You have to
even
hit
more
on
the
it.
chance than
This
the
is-
But the
process.
other part about it is
Chalky,
that
jump in,
you have
please.
to attract good free agents to come play, and they never did that either. It's two parts to it, because you leave too much to chance if you're going to draft players and hope that you're going to hit on every draft,
You just
even
said
if they're
Toronto-
the
that's what
top
Toronto
5
did.
draft.
You just said that with other teams.
What are you talking about? Toronto didn't. Toronto, the reason why they want to add Kawhi Leonard and they drafted Siakam late in the draft, and that's
Siakam?
why they
Siakam. He wasn't on the team that won.
I don't think he was on
he
that
was.
team.
Yes, he
Or
was.
wasn't.
He was a
He
starter.
was. What are you talking about?
Yeah, he was.
Siakam, he was a starter.
Okay.
Yeah, they had Van Fleet
But
and all
these
that stuff.
teams all won championships with the same record the Sixers had going into the process, is my point. So are you going to say that,
Yeah,
okay,
but
we
Kawhi-
drafted
wait, first of all,
Okafor, we
Kawhi
drafted...
wasn't a free agent.
Let me
They
finish.
made a trade and got Kawhi.
Right, but did they not do the things that they needed to do in order to be able to win a
The
championship
Sixers
because they
have the
didn't do
players
it?
to go and get
Yeah,
a
they,
Kawhi
right. They didn't. Have
All right,
that.
all right, all right. Once
But that's
again,
the
once
point.
again,
The point is
let
you
me
didn't-
step
you
in
didn't-
and
Yeah,
You
set
didn't
everybody
get the
straight.
right players to be able to
But in-
to build a
but in
team
those
that's a
years
championship
leading
caliber
up
Let's
to
team.
talk.
Kawhi,
Go ahead,
they didn't
talk.
have.
Well, let him get it out of their system. I'll clear it all up when we're done.
Well, you named the guys: Okafor, Fultz,
What the hell are you getting for
Ben
Okafor?
Simmons.
You-
I'm just I'm saying these are the guys you drafted in the process, right? These are the guys. So you didn't hit on
How about
everybody,
Joel
did you?
Embiid? Hall of Famer.
But again, no team. If you give a team 5,
Who cares if you have a Hall of Famer on the team? They haven't gone
but if
anywhere
you
with the
have a
Hall of
guy-
Famer.
But again, it
They
wasn't.
haven't
about,
won a championship.
It was
What
about.
were they winning with Andre Iguodala? What were they
We
winning
would,
with Andre
Jason,
Iguodala?
we would never know what happened if they didn't do what they did. We
I
know what happened, what
They
they
would finish
did.
40 and 40 every year.
No, you don't know that because I just told you 3 teams have won the
I just
championship
read
that
you
had the
7 years
same
of them
record.
finishing 40 and
Who was
40.
the 3 teams?
Did these teams have the same
Let Chalky
record?
talk. Come on, Chalky.
Who were
Did
the
they have
three
the same
teams?
record?
Who were the 3 teams that you only named?
The
For
Bucks?
1 year? Maybe for 1 year.
Right, the Bucks-
Let's look
the
at
What
Bucks-
does it matter? Did
every
they
other
win?
years.
Would you give away all those years for one championship?
Yeah, but
he's
but
not
but
making sense. Chalky,
the
please.
Sixers didn't draft the Greek Freak. They didn't. I mean, you those teams
Right.
got lucky.
They didn't.
You're gonna if
We
you're gonna,
drafted Embiid
right, but you're gonna.
same year.
But again, that's
No, it's
the
not the
ends.
same year.
The
That's
ends
wrong.
don't justify what
That's
the
wrong.
process were. They set themselves up to have a top draft pick to give because the odds say you're gonna miss on more than you hit on. So it set them up to have the most assets to get to get a player in
There's
here.
two
I want
parts of
Chalky
it.
to
Like
talk,
Embiid.
but I
There
just want to
two
say
parts of
one
it.
thing. The process was never allowed to be finished.
And it never got
Sam
finished.
Hinkie,
Right.
Sam Hinkie had a plan with all the draft capital that he built. They brought in clowns because
Correct.
I guess the owners went and cried to Adam Silver, so they brought
Again,
in clowns.
the only year they got the number 1 pick was after Hinkie got let go.
Right. And they blew every draft
Correct.
capital that he built.
So for you to
So-
say we don't know what would happen if they didn't do the process, we don't know what would happen if they let the
Correct.
process run its course.
Correct.
It ran its course. It ran
It
enough
didn't.
of its course.
It did not. It did
You
not.
stopped it
It
in
did
the
not.
middle
It
of
was not finished.
You stopped it in
It
the
was not
middle.
finished.
Nah. How many? Because ownership can't let that continue
Why?
and lose
Why?
fans.
Why?
Who's going to the
Says who?
games? They got to turn a
It wasn't
profit.
the
They got to
Sixers.
have.
Well,
they have to
It was
win
the other
games.
teams. It was the league that stepped in, not the Sixers.
No, no. The
Other
Sixers stepped
teams
in
complained
before
to
that.
Adam
It
Silver
was right.
and forced Adam Silver
Correct.
to come in and say, "We need you to get this guy out,
Correct.
and we're going to give you Colangelos to run the team for you."
And the first pick in the draft.
Right, and they greased their skids with giving him Ben Simmons.
So that happened. So that was a conspiracy that they had the first pick in the draft.
It was shady, but I mean, listen, they had the worst record. They might have got it anyway, but
They had the worst record in some other years too, right? Didn't they? That they didn't get it.
Well, you can point directly at him as being the reason why the process didn't work, because it isn't
No,
because
I already told you why the process didn't work, because it wasn't finished. It wasn't finished.
It wouldn't have gone any further.
Wow,
There
you
wouldn't have
can't
been
say
any.
that. Chalky, what did you have to say?
I don't
Chalky,
know.
come on,
I
come on.
can't talk
Chalky.
sense to people.
All right. Oh, where to start? Let's go back to 1986.
No.
I mean, I would say, I agree with Jason that after the Dr. J era, let's just say, trading Moses isn't really what ended up hurting him. It's not bringing in Brad Daugherty, who was a perennial all-star. Pair him with Barkley, and Barkley as a solid. Now, again, to what Jason also said, same thing with the Flyers. They ran into the dynasties. Was those Barkley teams with Daugherty going to get past the Pistons or the Bulls? Probably not, but you never know. It would have given them a better chance. But then, you talk about some of the unlucky drafts. So, you pull number 2 in a year when Chris Webber goes number 1, and you end up with Sean Bradley, which was a poor choice. You pull number 2 in a year where Tim Duncan goes number 1, and instead you end up with Keith Van Horn, who you trade for Tim Thomas. Not the best choice there. And then you pull number 2 in a year where John Wall goes number 1, becomes a perennial all-star, and you get Turner, who jump shot still looks worse than me, and I can barely shoot. So, they got some bad luck in those for sure. But we were talking about the Iverson era, and the first year they got good, where they got to the playoffs, was '99. They got swept by Indiana, Pacers in the second round. But I went to Game 4 of that, and they were down 3-0. Nobody thought the Sixers were going to come back, but that place was on fire the whole game, electric. And so Iverson, if we want to say Lindros reinvigorized the hockey fan base in the city, Iverson did that for basketball. I got to go to a couple games in the 2001 run, and the atmosphere was just out of this world. Everybody was fired up, and it was a team you could love. And that 2001 team reminded me of almost like the 93 Phillies, and you just had guys that had some career years, and they played above their heads. And there was no other great teams in the East that year. The Knicks were on their way down, so those teams from the 80s. Indiana had a down year. They brought in Isaiah Thomas to coach, and he can't coach. So it was the right team at the right time, and they ran into the Lakers juggernaut and lost in 5. But, nobody else in that team ever really amounted to much after that. Mutombo was at the end of his career. Aaron McKee was Sixth Man of the Year. Then he was shortly retired after that. So you had a lot of guys that played well. And then you had that period from 2004 to 2013 when the process started that they got out of the first round once, and that was because Derrick Rose tore his knee in the first round, and they were able to beat the Bulls as the 8th seed.
History professor. We know the history. Get to the process.
You let that nonsense go on for 15 minutes, and you're going to cut me off here when I'm trying to educate the people.
Let's get to the process. That's all we care about is the process.
The process was 100% the right thing to do.
Thank you. There we go.
So, and the whole concept of the process. So Meeker brings up those two teams. Those two teams are complete outliers when you look at the types of players that were on the championship teams for the whole lottery era. And I talked about it the other week a little bit. That Raptors team was built around guys that weren't lottery picks. It happened once. See, so there aren't Kawhi Leonards that are available in drafts that are not lottery picks, and Siakams, and same thing with the Bucks. They had one lottery pick that was Holiday, who they traded for. So they found a second rounder in Middleton who became an all-star. They took a shot on a freak that turned into a multi-time MVP in Giannis, and they got some other role players that, if Kevin Durant had half a shoe size smaller, they still wouldn't have made it to the championship round, because he would have hit a 3 in that game against Brooklyn, and it would have been over. So a little bit of luck there, but look, they were a very good team. But look at every other team and how they were built. There's star talent up top. And the purpose of the process was not to just get that one guy. Hinkie realized you need multiple lottery tickets to try to hit the jackpot, because he knew they weren't going to hit on every single one. And you could get it in a year where there's nobody good in the draft. I mean, you talk about the Okafor year. Up until the day before, everybody thought D'Angelo Russell was going to the Sixers because the Lakers were going to take Okafor second. Well, that switched. And so it comes to Okafor, and the talk at the time was, well, they made him draft Okafor because they didn't want Porzingis. Well, it turns out down the line that Porzingis' agent did not want him to go to the Sixers, so he refused to give any of his medical information to their staff. And Hinkie wasn't going to take a guy that he had no medical background on at number 3. Now, if you thought you're going to draft Okafor and then trade him again down the line like they did with Michael Carter-Williams, yeah, that's risky, sure. But a lot of this, he set them up to, draft some guys that are going to be stars and use other capital to bring in other guys to complement that. And he didn't get to finish it. And I think it accelerated too quickly because of everything they said with the league pressure.
Having guys like Embiid and Simmons not play, Embiid for 2 years, Simmons for a year, extended the tank as well. Otherwise, the process tank would have happened quicker, and people probably wouldn't have had a problem with it because it would have been 3 years of it, or 2 years of it. But it is what it is. I mean,
they knew Embiid wasn't playing that first year. That he was the only one that they drafted, knowing he wasn't going to play.
Right. I mean, Chalky went through a draft saying we got Okafor, but we couldn't. D'Angelo. I mean, these were all guys that Porzingis. Okay. None of them would have helped your team. So there's certain years in the draft that they're just not that it's not that good. That's why.
Yeah, but that's the point that I'm making is that you're talking about lottery ticket. Like, that's
Correct.
A chance you're taking.
You're
chancing to constantly put that ticket in every year until you hit on them. Right. I mean, like, how many years in a row can you do that?
Okay,
you cannot continue to do that.
Let's go with the Meeker plan. So let's look at the drafts they had from 2008 to 2013. Hold on. Maurice Spites. That's Meeker wants to build a championship round. Drew Holiday. I'll give you a good player there. Okay.
Won a championship.
But he was on
as a third wheel.
Yeah.
Okay. He was a pretty big part of their championship.
As a third wheel. Okay. Evan
what
Turner.
Does it make?
Evan,
Did he win?
Let me talk in your. I'm building your championship team here. Evan Turner.
Ish Smith.
I'm building your championship team here. Evan Turner.
This is what you're talking about.
I'm building your championship. Vukovic. Okay. Mo Harkness. And MCW. That's your championship that you wanted to win with.
We just totally blew past the Andrew Bynum trade. I forgot about that. Andrew Bynum was his answer because they were trying to go for it with Andrew Bynum, and then they sold the team. They were like, we made a mistake. They sold. That's when Harris bought the team.
Yeah. I mean,
six
unless
guys
you
get
lucky, and your philosophy is, Hinkie's philosophy was tank, get a bunch of lottery picks, and make the team better. Your philosophy is cross your fingers and hope you draft, what's his face, Joker in the second round, or the Greek Freak with the 13th pick,
with the 15th pick or whatever it was. Yeah, exactly.
That is way riskier than
that's called an outlier, like Chalky said.
Right.
Yeah. I don't. Again, like.
But why? How come Charlotte Bobcats
history tells us it didn't work because the guys that he drafted didn't turn out.
Well, they did.
That's
it.
It didn't finish. The process never finished.
You don't
there's
know.
It didn't work. Right. It didn't get a chance to get done. The league stepped in.
It was over.
Correct. Because he burnt
all. What else was going to get done?
We don't know. He had a
exactly.
We don't know what Hinkie's plan was next.
That ain't an answer. What do you mean?
You never had a plan. He was.
Never had a plan.
It's easy to tell a team to lose and trade away everybody and get first round picks for years and years and just take them and then hope that they hit. What is it? That's a plan? Tell me the plan.
My question is, what would his benefit have been if? Okay, I'm gonna be the GM. You know what I want to do? Not have a plan, but I want to lose as many games as I can. Why would he do that?
I understand the plan. Everyone understood the
plan.
plan.
Tommy told you his plan. His plan was you need multiple lottery picks because some of them are not going to pan out.
Statistically, they're not.
And then you need to build enough good players from that to have players that want to come and sign and play with you.
That's the part that you're saying never happened because they never got good enough to be able to bring in players to get around Embiid and to get around these guys you're talking about. That would have been the second part of the process, would it not?
Their assets
once you thought you were good enough.
We don't know what he was going to do with those assets. We don't think he's going to trade for Markelle Fultz. We don't know.
And all those guys, they were assets that they used. Does Hinkie ever make those trades? Right?
You're talking about a what if though. You're talking about what if this, what if that.
Well, because that's what you're talking about. Because they fired him in the middle of the process.
But it doesn't mean they would have been any further. Is my point. You don't know that they would have been any further than they are right now, do you?
Yeah, but what your answer was to not do the process. Do we know they would have won a championship?
No, my
They
point
would've-
is
they
that
would've still been
it
40
didn't
and
get
40.
us any further. You go through all these years of losing, and it got
again-
you
because it never was
Right.
able to be
Again.
finished.
All right. Well, it's too much. What if they kept him and they let him finish the process? We still don't know that they would have been any good. Is my point.
Well, yeah.
So
Well,
we
I
don't
know they wouldn't
we
have
don't
been
know
any
his
good with your-
skills.
with your
We
plan.
don't know his skills as a GM when it comes to trades or trying to acquire a free agent to come play, because that he never
But
got
that
a chance
doesn't mean
to
it
do.
didn't work or it wasn't correct.
Well, the guys that he drafted for the most part, didn't work out. I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm only saying they didn't work out, other than Embiid. So we are where we are, and we're no further than we were when the process started. And
Because
that's
it
the
wasn't
bottom
ever
line.
finished. Because
Well,
it never
but,
finished.
But it's all what if.
When you
We-
start painting
not-
a picture and then you're pulled out of it, and then the picture's
Yeah,
not complete,
right.
is it your fault?
Yeah, but you're making a supposition that it would have been so much further, because if they kept him as GM, he would have attracted more free agents and made the right trades. But that would never.
Like
but-
Tommy said, he
'Cause
wa-
that's the second
he
part of the
probably wouldn't have
process.
spent bullshit for Tobias
Right,
Harris, who
yeah,
can't
right.
play.
He-
He might not have traded up for Markelle Fultz and traded whatever he traded there.
Well, that is a big no-no. That
You
was
think he
that was a
makes
killer
that-
more
you
than
think
anything, because
he
you would have had
makes that
Jason
trade-
Tatum on your team right
You
now.
think he makes that trade?
Well,
Not
no,
necessarily.
no, you wouldn't.
Boston
No.
was-
Boston would have never traded in that.
Correct.
In that,
Boston
in that
would have
case.
kept the number one pick.
I mean, that's the one thing. Like when you would, I mean, I'm not sticking up for Colangelo, but when they say, "Oh, Colangelo," Colangelo made a deal with Ainge and said, "I'm taking. We want Fultz."
I agree with this.
And
Yes.
look, he knew Ainge from back when his father used to run the Suns, and like, yes, could Colangelo have went back on that? But then no other GM in the league would have dealt with him, and
He would have been blackballed.
He got
for
he
the
got
trade.
fired anyway for
Right.
having burner tweets. But like that's why, like, if you look at these trades on draft night, they don't make the trade until after each team drafts their guys. Now Boston wouldn't have drafted Fultz number 1 to trade him to Philly. They just would have went with Tatum. But
Correct.
I mean, there it's you lost the asset of the pick. That if you had sat at 3, you might have still got Fultz, and you could use that pick for something else in the trade. Now, where I'll say, Hinkie rubbed a lot of people in the Sixers the wrong way too. So there was pressure from the league, but there was internal pressure and pressure from agents. He managed to aggravate just about everybody around him, including some of the players, but some of them did love him. So he had more than just Adam Silver as an enemy as far as the way he ran the team went. But I mean, I'm just looking through here quickly, like where the Sixers really haven't done well in the last couple of years is in the drafts. Now they haven't been drafting as high, but finding these guys in the late first, early second round that are going to be rotational players or that can contribute to fill out a roster of top 3 picks. Looking at some of Hinkie's drafts. All right,
They got lucky with Maxey.
they got very lucky with Maxey. Like
that's
Maxey,
the only
but
one
he
that
was
really-
he was their first pick that year. Like some of these other second picks in the rounds, like Hinkie drafted Carter Williams, won the Rookie of the Year, flipped him at his highest value to get a couple picks after that. Then the next year so they drafted. We forgot about Noel. They drafted Noel, and he sat the whole year because he had a knee injury. So next year they drafted Embiid. Then they draft Alfred Payton, to trade for Saric. Right, so that was good.
Yeah.
And then later in the first round, early second round, they draft Jeremy Grant. He's a pretty good player now. Other guys he got later, Rashawn Holmes turned into a D. So like
Covington they signed.
So I mean, I'm not going to say Hinkie would have drafted, let's say, Josh Hart instead of the French guy TLC or Korkmaz or whatever. But like you look at these guys, and look, I'm partial to the Villanova guys, but you look where these guys go in the end of the first round. Hart, Brunson, these are all guys the Sixers passed over for some guys that never got on the court in the NBA, like on the Sixers team. So I would have had more faith in Hinkie finding value in those picks than it ended up happening with any of the GMs that have come along since then. And ultimately, what tanked the process was Ben Simmons in the end, and the fact that Butler didn't want to play with them, and look, at the time, I wanted them to run that team back. I understood why they chose Simmons over Butler. Jimmy Butler on the Heat in the playoffs was not the Jimmy Butler in just the one season here. Simmons was 21 years old, was an all-star, had been an all-defensive player already. I can't blame them for favoring Simmons and really Brett Brown over Butler. But look how he took the team down after that. And, that ultimately ends up being, if they would have got the second pick that year and would have drafted Ingram from Duke, he's been a much better player in the league than Simmons has been. So maybe that completely changes the trajectory of the team in different ways. Who knows? But the Simmons pick was the right pick at the time, but ultimately it was probably the worst thing. I'd say it's worse than the Fultz thing, because the Fultz thing got you Maxey in the end when you traded Fultz. So the Simmons,
don't forget the Bridges thing as maybe one of the top 5 worst trades that the team has ever made.
Bridges, I put an asterisk on it because Smith broke his foot in camp and then almost died. So
but
he never had a chance. I don't think he would have been as good as Bridges has become, but he never had a chance to be worth anything. Where they messed up with that was they got that first round pick that they put in the Harris deal, and if you think they should have never made the Harris deal, then yeah. But
look, the process was the right decision. The players are what ruined the process. The guys that were drafted and
Simmons,
part of the team ruined the process. It wasn't the process that was wrong.
Ben Simmons.
And again,
Ben Simmons was a consensus number 1 pick.
And he's not even.
No one's arguing that they shouldn't have drafted Ben Simmons. It was the right pick.
Right, but he
did end up
running
being
partner with Embiid. That was it. You had Simmons and you had Embiid, and that was if Simmons is the player Embiid is even if they didn't win a championship, you still wouldn't be saying the process was a failure. You'd be saying
I'll tell you what,
it was the right decision.
Go back and look at Ben Simmons' rookie season. His stats, his highlights. Kobe Bryant came out and said, "Wow, if this guy develops a shot, it's over."
Yeah,
That's how good Ben Simmons was.
Something was wrong in his brain. His brain.
He lost his mind. He
He led that team on, what was it, 16 game, whatever it was, at the end of the season without Embiid.
Right.
I mean,
right.
That was even after the second year when they lost to Toronto. It was like he's got everything but a jump shot. He gets a jump shot, it's over.
It's the biggest tragedy in Philadelphia sports.
Next year he starts having injury problems. Next year, misses the playoffs against Boston. And the year after that, he completely collapses against Atlanta.
Once they started to do the hack at Ben, he lost his mind.
Yeah, but he always had. That was always there. That
he didn't have the mental fortitude.
Yeah.
Look, he was a kid. Like him and Embiid were completely different people. Embiid was the kid who didn't pick up a basketball till age 15 or whatever, and had to work to become the best. Ben Simmons, from whatever age, was basically preordained as the next LeBron, and he was a damn good player that lived up to the hype to some extent. But he played. He left the LSU team at the end of the year. Like it was all.
There was reports at LSU that he was going to turn into this type of player.
Ben Simmons wants and loves to be a basketball player. He wants the fame and the notoriety that comes with being a basketball player. He doesn't love playing basketball, and that's where the disconnect comes. And he didn't have the heart.
He's one of those guys that is great at something and loves being great at something, but doesn't like working at what he's not great at. Like, I want to keep driving.
Yeah, he doesn't want to face what he can't do, and
that's what infuriates me almost more than anything else is that, okay, you could say he quit on the team and he passed the ball up, didn't want to play. Okay, all true. We're sitting here, Philly did it. He was so goddamn talented that the fact that all went to waste. Maybe it was never going to be there like that because of the mental block or whatever. But the fact that you just don't try to get better, like you don't try to improve at all. When you have all the talent in the world, there's nothing stopping you from getting better. And we saw those workout videos every summer of shooting. It was like it was like he was mocking you. Like he would do nothing but post Instagram videos all summer shooting threes in a gym, and then would never shoot in a game. I was at the game when he hit his first three, and the whole place gave him a standing ovation. And it wasn't like a mock. It was like, okay, let's do this.
For the record,
the whole year.
He did post on Twitter today that he's back, or he's and he's
got his head down or something like that.
So we'll see. We'll go through it again.
This is a question. I mean, his downfall kind of started when Doc became the coach. Do you think it has anything to do with that? Like,
no.
If there was a different coach here at the time that his head went south,
the coach that
could have reeled him in,
was the same results.
Yeah,
what's
I don't
that?
blame Doc.
Brett Brown coddled him and let him do whatever he wanted, and it was the same. It was the same.
Well, no, he was a better player when Brett Brown was the coach, though. He didn't have these mental
No, he was
problems.
asked to be a different type of.
I think it accelerated it. I was going to say the process, but I want to start litigating the process again. Before Rivers got fired, Sixers were looking for the coach, and Embiid wanted D'Antoni, and Simmons wanted Tyronn Lue, and there was a clash because they each went different guys. And then Rivers got fired, and it was like, okay, he's the consensus, we can agree. And Doc was tougher on him than Brown had ever been, and he wasn't strong enough for that. And obviously, like, Doc didn't say the right thing after the game necessarily, didn't phrase it right. But then, like, if that really hurt his feelings that bad, like, dude, you're the guy that passed the ball. You're the one that gave the ball up.
Like, the guy's still a joke. He got traded, and he's still a joke.
He got traded. He has no heart. He quit on his team this year.
Oh, it's gone now. I mean, his whole love for playing the game is gone. But I'm only saying I don't know if we were looking for the coach to take Embiid to the next level, but we really needed the coach to take Simmons to the next level. And because Embiid didn't have that kind of problem. Like he's putting his all into the game every single minute. Simmons was the problem. True, well, come on. I mean,
well, he needed a pep talk in the Boston series to play.
All right, but he's not at any level at all of Ben Simmons when it comes to the mental part of the game. So I don't know, if they would have brought in a different coach, if we'd be talking a different story about his career.
That's Philadelphia for you. Blame the coach. It's always the coach's fault.
I'm not blaming him. I'm not blaming him. I'm just asking. I'm just asking.
I think unless you were trading Embiid and bringing in a new coach, the story would have been the same because Simmons wouldn't be more of the focus, and he wasn't going to be the best guy on the team. And then he just lost all will after that.
Simmons was always destined to become what Ben Simmons is. There's no
just would have been at a different time.
There's no
trajectory
that would have.
Listen, the guy has. I'm no psychologist, but the guy has mental issues
Absolutely.
in his family. His sister is out of her mind. So it's probably something in that family.
Yeah, and one of his family members molested his sister or something. Like, there's a lot.
Oh, that's her story.
But there's a lot. I mean, look, anybody that's going to date one of the Jenner family has mental problems. I'm sorry. So,
yeah.
Well, in previous podcasts, I was saying, like, it seems like we're just repeating history. We always try to put the pieces around Iverson and just couldn't find the right fit, and now we're kind of doing the same thing with Embiid.
Iverson was a flawed player, and he was very hard to build around because what was he? What was his position?
Yeah,
what is his position?
5'11", two guard.
Shooting guard. That's not. How do you build around that? How do you build around
5'11" is being generous too, but
right. How do you build around that? It's tough.
Yeah, they build the only way you can with defense, role players,
role players,
defense and role players. Yeah,
the teams the teams they were running into at the time are pretty good too in the playoffs that they lost to.
They had that one year where they had the right mix with them.
Yeah,
they had the 4 role players and Iverson, and they ran into the Lakers. But after that,
I mean, who knows? Like that, Meeker mentioned the Detroit series. Detroit, they lost in 6 that second round in 2003. Detroit, but Detroit hit 2 buzzer beaters in that series. They missed them. Sixers are in the conference finals against the Nets, who they had beat pretty good that year. So that was. But you're right. I mean, but the difference is Iverson has to be the alpha dog. That's his personality, his game. Embiid will never be the alpha dog on a championship team.
Did they have one in Jimmy Butler? Did they?
Of course.
Maybe he would have been, yeah.
He looked great in that Denver series.
Well,
he was done.
Right.
He was done. He was out of game.
Hurt and gassed.
He didn't win. That's all. For being such a winner, he didn't. He has 0 titles. But the thing with the Philadelphia is it's just always epic. Like it never could just not work. Like Lindros, it had to be like all the way it deteriorated.
He almost died. He almost died.
But I mean, just the deterioration. Then you look at the Sixers, like you mentioned, Colangelo with a burner account. Like, what in the world? Like, how does that? Ben Simmons isn't not just not that good. He became like a Looney Tune, and it became like this huge. It's always got to be this epic.
It's unbelievable. Go to the first picks in the process era. Noel, he was hurt, and then he's breaking toilets in his house because he's just stuffing M80s down there or whatever. And Embiid misses 2 years. Simmons goes crazy. Okafor is getting pulled over on the Ben Franklin Bridge for driving 200 miles an hour when he's a rookie. Zaire Smith almost dies. Like it's
Yeah.
insane. Like what happened, you could never make up that story and have people believe it.
They should do a process Hall of Fame of the players, and like I was looking through.
They do have one.
Oh, dude, Isaiah Cannon. You remember him?
Not to pimp any other podcast, but there is a Sixers related podcast that has a process Hall of Fame that I believe put some banners up in Xfinity Live. So
who was the number one process player?
I'd have to go back and look.
Is it like as a joke, or because there's some real players that they had, like you
I mean,
mentioned,
so
Grant and Covington and Rashawn Holmes?
I think you can't have been a really good player.
Yeah, I would think it's more like
there's another one, Christian Wood.
Tony Roten. There you go.
Tony Roten, that's the guy I was trying to think of. He is he is a process Hall of Famer. I mean, they sold shirts of all the guys that were on like those first 3 or 4 years of teams. There was like 100 and something guys or whatever it was that they cycled through, and the names that Tommy has there in front of him. But
yeah, Elton Brand was on that team.
Yeah,
look,
that's
Hinkie,
how
the only mistake Hinkie made, and I said this on is he was so bad. Like, even if they won 20 games a year instead of 10, they would have gotten away with it. And they weren't 1-29 to start the season. They would have gotten away with it. He just took it to another, like.
Well, I think
he was so open with, I'm just going to put a roster of horrible players out there and show no.
I think he was, two things there. I think he was trying to sell everything he could, right? To kind of like when dump deals like we do in our baseball league, sell everything you could, and then he didn't want to sign anybody and be stuck in a contract with somebody.
Yeah, but there's ways to stink and tank and give the appearance like you're making somewhat of an effort. I mean, he was close to just putting me and Jimmy out there, for God's sake. I mean,
I turned down my contract offer. I was waiting for San Antonio to call, but then
Jimmy, you could have wore the C on the Sixers.
That was
you played your cards right.
I guess T.J. McConnell would have probably been one of those process Hall of Famers.
Yeah, McConnell, obviously. The other thing I'll say about Hinkie was that, and I sort of said before, is that he didn't help himself because he lacked what's the buzzword? Emotional intelligence in some situations. Like, he didn't talk to the press, so the press, got on his case.
Yeah.
He didn't really deal well with his bosses and didn't want to talk to anybody, so that didn't work. Obviously, he had some good relationships with the players, and Embiid loves him to this day, but at some point, the owners are like, well, this guy's being a jerk to us. Why are we defending him again?
It's like Chip Kelly was. If he wasn't such a jerk, he probably would have lasted a few more seasons with the Eagles. But they got tired of his personality. Jason? Who was my favorite Hinkie story was? What did he used to do with Vlade Divac? He was purposely just make deals with Vlade to isolate.
He would just call Divac and just rob Vlade. I mean, how many trades did
he
make?
He would rank how dumb the GMs are, so he knew which ones that he could.
I forgot about the whole Stauskas thing where they traded. They needed cap room to sign Rondo, who was over the hill at that point, and so they got Stauskas and 3-4 pick swaps in a row, which turned out to be the third pick that they got for Fultz.
Exactly. That's what Meeker you don't get with Hinkie. It was like it just wasn't him just totally just. Losing. He was also robbing these like Vlade Divacs in all of the world to get this draft capital. Like he had a plan. Like unlike your plan of being 40-40 every year and having Mo Harkness and who's this Spites? Spites.
What happened before that doesn't matter. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if you're saying that the process wasn't complete because of everything you said. We wouldn't have known whether or not he would have been able to surround the guys that he drafted with the right guys because we never really saw him trade for a real player or attract a real free agent.
But that's why we said the process.
But that doesn't mean it was a failure. That just means it was incomplete. It wasn't given a chance.
You could say that, but I can't say that it would have worked. I don't know that we would be any further along as we are right now.
But you can't say I'm not able to make a steak if I'm halfway done cooking it and you pull me out of it.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
you can't say I'm not able to make a steak.
Yeah, but you can't laud him and make him like a god.
Nobody's saying
world
that
because we know. Well, he named his baseball team after him. Yes,
listen,
he is saying it.
I think he would have eventually became a god, but I don't think.
And he did.
It's an incomplete.
And he did get
incomplete.
Embiid out of it. I mean, you got to
Yeah, you got a
Alright,
Hall of
well,
Famer.
What was hard about that? He drafted the best player in the draft. I mean, that of course. Okay, you got him
What was
beat out.
hard
right,
about
but because he wasn't
Yeah, what's hard?
because he wasn't the 15th worst team in the league. So the process was being the worst team to get the most assets. When you're middle of the road, you're the Charlotte Bobcats, and you're drafting 12th every year.
Yeah, but
You're
there's
drafting
other
15th
teams
every year.
that didn't
There's
go
not.
through this process
There's-
that have won
There's a
NBA
couple
championships.
We're going
outliers.
back to-
There's a couple outliers, like Chalky said. That's it.
Yeah, we're going back again to you're getting yourself deeper into being wrong.
And
because
these
Chalky
outliers are
already
being
pointed
created
out.
more with the new collective bargaining and the things that Silver
Correct.
had put in place that did not
Right.
exist when. I mean, it exists probably because of the tank. And different things
I
like-
just read you
but-
6 seasons of them finishing 40-40 and drafting Mo Harkness and Maurice Spites. And
right,
everybody
and
else.
the process. It even although it didn't work, they had 6 consecutive seasons where they had almost 50 wins, like in the regular season. So for it not even work, they're still way better than they would have been with those other teams.
Right.
Well, the years leading into them drafting Iverson, they were terrible for 5 or 6 years, but they weren't doing all the things that you're talking about, because that I don't know if it was even something that no one ever thought. Hey, let's just lose on purpose to
because
try and get draft
I
collateral.
told you what
But-
happened. They traded Barkley and got nothing back for him, and then they were
there
done.
was no plan. No, your
teams,
but they ended up landing on Iverson, and then everything changed at that point. Now, at least they got to an NBA Finals with him.
Right, but
how did they get there? They didn't get there by continuously tanking while they had the best player on the team, Iverson. They actually brought in players to get to that.
Jerry Stackhouse.
You can
Sean
look at the
Bradley.
same team and say they didn't have to do those things.
I'm reading you that
But
back
we
then
already
when
told
they were
you why,
bad and
because
making
they
all these
drafted
draft
Embiid
picks.
and he sat for 2 years. They drafted a Simmons and he sat for a year. They drafted.
Well,
it's still luck.
Let
It's
me-
still luck. You just
there's-
have to hit on the right
there's- there's
but
luck, but-
again, it's luck that he's getting. Would you rather be lucky with 1 lottery ticket, or would you rather be lucky your chances with 5 lottery tickets?
I understand what you're saying, but I just don't know that it would have
but let me
manifested in
let
what
me
you
just-
think it would have manifested into.
But let me go back to what you're saying here. Okay, so if you tried to be a little better, but you just weren't, so in the years after Barkley got traded, the Sixers were drafting Clarence Weatherspoon, Bradley
Mediocre
too,
player.
Sharon Wright. Like that's where your 7th, 8th pick in the drafts were getting you, right? So they get 3rd pick.
Sean Bradley was a
I think Sharon Wright was a
second
higher
or
pick
3rd
than-
or 1st pick in the
He was
draft.
a second
I'm not-
pick. He was a second pick.
And
Yeah,
Sharon
that's-
Bradley
wasn't Wright like
Sharon Wright was like 4th.
Yeah.
Was he 4th that year? I think he was
he
that high.
4th.
Might have
I-
been 4th.
I thought
But
it was 4th.
Weatherspoon was a top, whatever pick. So you're not. Those aren't top 3 picks. Like Bradley was the wrong pick. So yes, that's exactly the case if you miss it. And then you got Stackhouse was the 3rd pick. You end up with the worst record. You draft Iverson. So then the next year you get the second worst. You get the 2nd pick and you draft Keith Van Horn. Well, Van Horn was traded for Thomas, who turned into guys that later brought guys onto that championship team. Stackhouse was traded for Ratliff and McKee, who were starters, and then Ratliff was from Mutombo. So they didn't draft all those guys, but they built a team through those guys that drafted by trading them to other teams
By
to fill
trading
out
draft
that
capital.
roster, bringing in the Eric
Right.
Snows of the world, and George who did they trade for Tyronn Hill? I forget. It was nobody, I think. But
And that's what Hinkie. That was the plan. Was to
and
gather.
that
these
would have been a
op-
chance
to
to
gather
do
these
that.
options.
Yes.
I think it was to give you optionality to either move them or draft them or put
Correct.
them part of it. And
Now,
again, that got stopped.
They drafted.
middle.
I'm sure they drafted Jerry Stackhouse, thinking like he was going to be the next great shooting guard on the team. Like, all right, so like that's what started getting me excited again about the Sixers was okay. Stackhouse, he had a great college career. He was an okay pro, but him and Iverson weren't the right fit. But they kept picking high and made trades to.
And
build
it's
a team
not like
around
and a team
Iverson.
like Milwaukee. It's not like they scouted the Greek Freak and made a great pick. They were the 13th pick, and he was the best at that point. Well, we might as well take him. He's the best guy that's out there.
Yeah.
And they took him and got lucky. I mean, that's
Right.
That's what you said. Lucky. Got lucky.
Sharon Wright was number 6 in
Yeah,
two,
but
in
I-
1994.
A lot of teams have to be lucky in order to get good.
Right, but they
Seth
tried-
Curry.
the
Seth
process
Curry
was-
wasn't a top
But
pick.
Who's
the
7th?
process was to control.
Well, it's still
your-
not. It's 7th.
The
It's not
process-
Okay.
top
No,
three.
Maurice
It's not
Spites
lottery.
wasn't 7th. Okay. All these guys that I've just read, Vukovic, Harkness, they're not 7th picks, right? They're 20th picks. That's how you wanted to build your team.
No, you keep saying that. That's not what I'm saying.
How did you want to build?
Your philosophy was to get lucky. You just said it.
If
No,
we
these
didn't
other
start the
teams
process,
that have gotten lucky, that have gotten the Giannis's of the world and the Seth
you
Currys
keep
of the
bringing
world.
Giannis. Bring up
There's
somebody else.
32 teams in the league.
Well, hold on.
But you're not listening to me. You just want to listen to what you want to hear.
I am
And
listening. You're not naming
but
teams like
here-
the Bobcats, like the Nets, the teams that have done your philosophy and did not get lucky.
But here's a team that Meeker keeps mentioning that this is the example of why you need multiple cracks at it. Okay, Embiid was the third pick. Who was the second pick that year?
I have to look. I don't know. Let me see.
You should know this.
First pick was Wiggins.
You should know this. Jabari Parker, a Dookie. Milwaukee was dead set on taking him number 2, no matter what. They didn't want Embiid. They didn't want Wiggins. They wanted Parker. So whoever didn't get drafted out of Kansas, they wanted Parker number 2, number 1. What happened? Parker, bum, stinks, like most of the Duke players in the league. So, they swung and missed, but they had picks that were high for. Milwaukee was not a good team for most of that decade before Giannis came in. So it's that's the perfect example of you need multiple cracks at it because you might fall in love with Jabari Parker, who turns into garbage as an NBA player.
The process was
but the problem is if that's where you're picking, if you're picking top 3 or 4, and they end up being an Okafor, then you don't get anything for him in a trade. So you're thinking of taking these guys, and then you have optionality of trading the guys that don't work out for you. If they don't work out for you, no one wants them.
It's not that
not necessarily.
They might
not but then you stink and you get another good pick.
Or they might be okay.
Right, so you keep stinking.
Or they don't fit
until you hit.
But again,
I don't know.
Do you have a better odds of hitting on a player drafted in the top 3 or drafted in 15 to 20? Obviously,
it's infinitely times more if it's a top 3.
Right,
then,
it's not
yes.
right. It's because Hinkie used statistics, and statistics, analytics told you that your odds of getting a better player, which common sense. So what they did is they put them in place to draft multiple top 5 picks to hit on a cup. They hit on only one. That was the problem, which was Embiid. That was the problem. They needed to hit on 2 of the 5, and they only hit on 1 of the 5. And then he still was in the middle of the process when he got kicked out.
Right, he had all that draft capital still.
And actually, he only drafted 3 of them, right? Noel, Okafor, and Embiid. Simmons and Fultz weren't him; they were the Colangelos. So you didn't let him finish the process. But again, the process is correct in what it says. The players let down the process. The guys that they got let the process down. And we can name 3 teams that got lucky, but there's 32 teams in the league. There's the Atlanta Hawks, the Charlotte Bobcats, the New Orleans, the Pelicans, who got Zion, and they stink. I mean, there's a million teams that do your philosophy and always stink, and will continue to stink. The Bulls have stunk for how long now doing that, being in the middle of the road.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Remind me of the championship they won since then.
Again, it's easy to say the process didn't fail if you just
remind me of
result.
How many rounds have they gotten out of the playoffs since then?
Process wasn't complete.
It all points to Ben Simmons, in my opinion. If he would have been the guy, we may be talking differently about this conversation. But he was the one that they depended on, and it didn't work out because he's a head case.
I agree with that. I mean, if Simmons was the player he's supposed to be, yeah, it would have been a lot easier to get another player or 2 around them. But it doesn't. But that doesn't mean the process was a failure, or the process was wrong in what they did.
I said in one of the earlier pods, up until that Toronto team, there was one team in the lottery era that won a championship without a top 3 pick on their team, and that was Detroit, and they had a 4th overall pick on their team. So they just missed outside that top 3.
It's only recently that you're getting these outliers. You was star hunting. That was what it was.
To your point, I think it could become more common because with this new CBA, they have all these kind of extra. Like a team like Golden State's not going to be able to keep bringing these guys back.
And the NBA realized like the NFL is so popular because of the parity that happens from year to year. And you look at the NBA this year, it was one of the better years that we've had in a long time. It's because you didn't know who the champion was going to be for the whole season. It wasn't a dominant team for the whole season. No. So, I think you're going to see that more and more as well.
Yeah.
All right, wow, we went. It was a it was a long, fun episode. Next week we will be maybe Chalky could put a best of together. I don't know.
Yeah, it's gonna be like
Jeez.
2.5 minutes. It's
It's not going to be a lot.
best up. Maybe the
Or bloopers. Maybe you can do a
bloopers, or
bloopers.
something like that. Or
Just do a whole
the,
Meeker episode.
the best moments
Or
of
do-
Jason getting really angry, like
Word.
this-
Yeah, do an isolation. Do just an episode. It's just the isolation camera of a close up of Meeker the whole time. I think that
it's,
would draw viewership.
yeah.
Episode
so.
60, Broad Street Hustle.
Let me say, if I can just
Go
end
for
with
it.
one thing. I was going to throw to when Jason was talking the stats earlier, but he got right into the Flyers. I think this says it all because it'll book in our 2 episodes. Do any of you guys know the winningest as far as championships professional franchise in Philadelphia history?
As far as championships,
It's
are
probably like
concerned,
the Philadelphia Athletic. No, they stunk too, right? Philadelphia Warriors or whatever it is.
I guess it's
Or the Wings. It's probably the Wings.
4 major sports.
Oh, okay, all right.
You said it. It's the Philadelphia Athletics.
The Athletics.
Oh, it was the
Yeah.
Athletic.
They had 5 World Series championships, and they have not been in the city for almost 70 years now.
That's pretty sad.
I think
Sad.
that says it all.
pretty sad.
All right,
gonna go
episode
home and cry now.
60, Broad Street Hustle. We'll catch you in a couple weeks. Thanks for listening. Have a good night.
Peace.